Hello everyone. I wanted to make a video about the differences between a few different generations of Strider knives. These ones in particular are Strider SMFs, starting with this one, which is a Generation 1 Strider SMF made in 2004. This one is an NSN model SMF. I don't know exactly when that was made, but it was before the lock change, the lock face change. This one is a double gunner grip G10 model. It was made a while ago, but also right after the initial change from the radius lock face to the flat lock face. We're going to go over a little bit of measurements, a little bit of the different details that they have between the generations, and yeah, well, let's get started. So I'll move these ones out of the way. As I said, this one right here, this is a Generation 1 Strider SMF. 16 years old at this point. You can see it does have a little bit of a different pattern than the newer ones have, and this is because it was more done by hand. You know, someone would take, I'm assuming, like a little blasting device and then do it by hand, whereas the other ones, I'm not sure how they're done, but they're very much more uniform these days. You do have a little bit of a different blade shape, and I'll bring in another one to compare. You can see that there is a little bit of a difference. The Generation 1 has more of a slope, it seems like, towards the front, where this one is kind of more flat. There does seem to be maybe a little bit more of a belly right here on the Generation 1. It is markedly different, though. The older ones, as this is the oldest SMF that I've ever owned, this one in particular has a radiused G10 to it. The newer ones don't have this, not even the aluminum ones have this. It's a radiused G10 all the way around. It's kind of rough up here, but this is a tool, 100%. But you can see that it's radiused. And even the titanium here is a little bit radiused. Not quite as much as the G10 side is, but it's also radiused. One major difference here you have is the jimping is very, very angular. It's very sharp. People talk about Strider thumb. This is probably the kind of a knife where it came from. This whole thing, the Strider hole, as you might call it, is not radiused at all. It's pretty much 90 degrees in there. It's not sharp. It's not going to cut you, but you do have to have a little bit of tough fingers to be able to open it up. You can see the pattern here of the flaming is also done by hand. And there's also no LBS button. This is the first generation SMF. It wasn't until I believe the second generation SMF when you started to see the LBS buttons. And those are the ones stamped Hinderer, because obviously it's the Hinderer lock bar stabilizer. So this is pretty interesting. I don't really worry. I carry this one all the time. I don't really worry too much about it getting the lock bar stretched out too far, because for one, actually the lock bar tension on this is very strong. It's the strongest for any SMF that I've ever had. And maybe that's why, is because it was before the invention of the SMF, or the LBS, sorry. And maybe they just wanted it to be tighter. You can also see that the lock bar cutout here it's like a half moon shape, whereas now they're a little bit different. And it's also a little bit wider. That also contributes to a little bit stiffer lock face because there isn't as much of a cutout. And you can also see too, they were using higher thickness, or a greater thickness of titanium pocket clips here. This one's actually pretty thick, and these ones are actually kind of thin. And it's probably just a cost-cutting issue, which is not a big deal. These things are still resilient to this day. But this one is done, it's just a little bit more finished in some ways than the newer ones. Like I said, I really like the radiused the radiused G10. It fits really, really well in the hand. It gives it, especially in the left hand, because it fits right into your palm there. Really good grip, nice and radiused. This one is actually a thinner blade stock than the SMFs these days. Take my calipers out here. sure it's 0. So we'll go at its thickest point, 177. Maybe 176, 178. Let's close it. Zero it out, make sure that it's good there. It is a little bit thinner, not much, but it's a little bit thinner. 176. And I've noticed that in use, absolutely, that this knife cuts much better than the other Strider SMFs that I've had in the past. This one, it just kind of glides through cardboard, glides through thicker materials like rubber hose, anything that's very resistant to cutting. It glides a lot better. It just has a little bit of a thinner blade, and honestly, that makes a lot of difference. You can see that the tip is still thick, but it's kind of fine in comparison to this one. Let me get the camera to focus here. This one is very thick, very stout tip, wedge-like. This one is pretty much a joy to use, honestly. I do carry this one every day, 24 hours a day. Whenever I need a knife, whenever I need to use a knife for anything that's not food preparation, I go to this one. This one has had the stop pin replaced. You might be able to tell that the titanium side here is a little bit thicker on the stop pin. And that's because it was starting to get a little bit of lock rock, and also the pin started to come loose. And well, I do kind of use this knife hard. It just started to slip in and out. So sent it to Strider, they replaced it for me, no problems there. Lockup on this is pretty good. It does have a little bit of a wobble to it. Not sure if you can hear that. And that is because, and it's going to be very difficult to capture, if I can capture it at all. I can't really pick it up, but there's a little bit of a gap in the pivot area. I'm not sure what exactly the problem is, whether the G10 portion is too thick or whether there's a little bit of a warping going on right here, but pretty much there's a little bit of a gap. Almost, if this is one of the washers, the titanium portion is like this. Obviously this is exaggerated, but that's kind of how it sits, and that contributes to the wobble. Now, I've tried to tighten it out. I can kind of tighten it out, but it does loosen up pretty quickly. These early ones were made of S30V. This was Strider's steel of choice for maybe his second generation of folders, you might say. I may be getting that wrong. But the initial ones were ATS 34, and then he went to the S30V Bose Heat Treat by Paul Bose rather, and he does the S30V and 428C treatments for Buck now. This is really good steel, honestly. I mean, S30V these days is considered low end, but it honestly performs really well. It's really easy to sharpen. It doesn't chip very easily or at all. I mean, I've pried with this thing. I've accidentally hit it while I was cutting into something hard, into concrete. I've dinged the tip on it. No chips, definitely some rolls. I'm not going to say that it didn't roll on me, but it's definitely a resilient steel. It's something I've worked with for about 7 months now, and it's very, very resilient. It takes a really nice edge. This one has been beat up a little bit. I do need to put a fresh edge. You can kind of see a little bit of a ding there. That's from work, but I'll be able to put a nice fresh edge on it. It doesn't have that deep of a primary cutting edge there. It's kind of shallow, but that's fine. I'm not sure what degree it is on there. I sharpen freehand, so I'm not really sure. I just kind of go. I went with what the factory edge angle was. This was brand new when I got it. Purchased it on the secondary market. So yeah, that's the Generation 1. It does have the radius lock face to it. It's not too much of an issue. I don't believe that the lockup problem was because it had the radius lock face necessarily. I think it just worked its way over through use, and it just needed a little bit of a tune-up. So here's the next generation. I don't know what generation you might call this. This might be 3rd generation Strider SMF, sort of. I mean, if this was the first widely purchased civilian model, this was probably maybe the 3rd. Not too sure on that one. But it is a bead blasted S30V blade, bead blasted titanium lockside, black G10. And you'll see with this one, it's unmarked, but unmarked blades are S30V. This one has been used quite a bit. Got scratches all over this thing. It's been carried. I am not the first owner of this one. I purchased this one on the secondary market as well. Pretty much all my Striders are secondary market. This one in particular it had the potential to be issued to people in the military, but I can't say for sure whether or not this one in particular was issued to somebody. This one, the initial buyer was in the military, and he sold it to someone who I bought it from. He said he did take it overseas. I don't know what branch he was in. I don't know what he did. May or may not have been super secret squirrel, recon, super soldier, or could have been a cook. I have no idea. So, but it has seen a lot of use, and for as old as it might be, I'm not sure because it does have that radius lock face, it locks up really well. You can't really, it's not quite smooth enough to be able to flick out without some wrist. A little bit. But it hasn't really been, I guess, broken in. For as scratched up as it is, it really hasn't been used that much. It does have a nice edge on it. This S30V, the little bit that I've used it, it's not quite as resilient as the Bose heat treat, but it's still really good. Strider does a really, really good job with their heat treats, regardless of what steel it is. So, I really do enjoy even the bit more basic steels. You can see this one, the stop pin is the same thickness all the way through. Hasn't had a replacement. Locks up, I would say right about 50-ish%, and it stayed there. There's a little bit of lock stick, but I actually like that. Lets me know that it's locked up. These are all tools. I don't really care about smoothness or non-lock stickiness or anything like that. It's just, they're all tools. As I said, you can see that these are thinner pocket clips, which is fine. Another reason they might have had the thicker pocket clips initially was because there was no LBS on it. Maybe with a little bit of tension on the thicker pocket clip, a little bit of a shallower cutout, you get a good tension on the lock bar that prevents it from being overexerted. This one obviously has a hinderer lock bar stabilizer. This one obviously isn't stamped hinderer, but it does do its job, obviously. This one is a little bit thicker. We'll see, this one is about 1/8-4. A little bit thicker. And honestly, you can just tell as it moves through things. Now, it is thick behind the edge, which is fine. Again, these are really supposed to be hard use tools. And that's exactly what they are. So I don't have a problem with it. This one doesn't move as easily through materials. And it's really just because the finish is a lot rougher, even though it's been worn down a little bit. This is a very fine blasting. It's almost smooth to the touch. Now, granted, it's been scratched up a little bit, but it is very smooth to the touch. This one is much rougher, and it does show its wear a lot easier. Now, the problem that I have, and it's just me personally, is that the bead blasted blades, regardless of company that they're from, they can get a little bit spotty with rust, even if they're stainless. So I just use some CLP and a nylon brush. Takes care of it. But as far as generational differences, you can see this thing is a lot more squared off all the way around. Down here, it's just a very light, just a hit with something to kind of knock the edge off. This one you can see is a little bit bigger, and it's a lot rounder. Same thing here. You can see there's a big radius here on the Generation 1, but not so much on the NSN. And that translates to maybe a little bit less comfort in the hand, but honestly, it's not too bad. It really isn't. These things are honestly pretty ergonomic considering what they are. They fit perfectly in the hand in kind of a triangular shape, the way that your hand naturally grips it. So it is pretty comfortable. I wouldn't call any of this a hot spot or anything. The jimping right here is a little bit more radiused. You can see a little bit of the spotting right here. It's a little bit more radiused. It's a little bit thicker up here at the top, but maybe that's a little bit of an optical illusion because of how radiused it is, but it does actually look a little bit thicker. We can measure that. We're looking at 0.159, let's just call it 0.16 here on the NSN. And this one is 0.144, so it is a little bit thicker. Just the way that it's made, I think it's overall thicker as well. And honestly, this one is much more comfortable, but I've also been carrying it for a long time. I do kind of prefer the blade shape of this one. It is a little bit more spear pointy, but they all do their job. Kind of thick behind the edge there, but that's fine. Next one up is one that's kind of sought after these days, is a double gunner grip SMF. This one has the bead blasted finish on the inside of the pockets, and then it's hit with some kind of a buffer, and it has a little bit of a satin finish. It has a satin finish clip, black G10. So this one is very nice, and you can see a little bit of the difference between generations. This one has no play, nothing up and down, nothing side to side, no play whatsoever, and it's able to be flicked out easily. Now, there is a little bit of lock stick, but again, I do like that. This one is made after the change to the new lock face. You can see that this one is almost flat in comparison to this one, which is radiused. You're not going to have as many issues as the lock wears in. And the lock does wear in. It's just a kind of a fact of life. Regardless of which generation of Strider you have, whether it's a Strider or a Hinderer or anything that doesn't have the steel lock face on it, it's going to wear in a little bit as it work hardens. And that's fine. As long as it's secure, that's all I care about. Especially up and down. Side to side, I can kind of live with. So this one is much thinner overall, you can see, and obviously it's radiused. Both scales have a radius to it because this is basically a CC model, which is smooth all the way around, radiused, and then they put pockets in it. They machine the pockets in it. So it's really, really thin in the hand. This might bother some people here as it is pretty thin. You can see I don't even have to measure. This is very thin up here. It does kind of hurt your thumb a little bit, but I mean, if you're really working hard on this and you need that pressure for whatever reason it might be, it does help. I mean, you may be wearing gloves when you're using this. This one has a radiused LBS, as most of the non-Lego Striders do. This one actually is a Great Precision Blasted Zerk one. That came with this one when I bought it on the secondary market. I do have the original as well. It's steel, but it's been worn down. It's not black anymore. You can see the tiger striping on this one is a lot more uniform in comparison to the old school one. It's also a lot lighter, and I'm not really sure what that is or why it's that way. I'm not sure because this one is also S30V. And from what I understand, Striders that are not something like ATS 34 or another steel, when they heat treat it, it would actually turn black, and then they would blast the lines into it. S30V doesn't turn black when it's heat treated. It actually turns, I think, like a gold color. So they actually have to black oxide it. So it is a little bit lighter. I'm not really sure why. But you can see a different pattern because it's not done by hand. If you look at others, even the brand new Striders, These ones, they all have pretty much the same pattern to them. At least it looks like that to me. And that's what makes this one unique, is because there's not another one anywhere that looks like that. Every one is unique. So that's a little bit of a difference there. The stop pin is still the same. This was before the change they made to the smaller stop pins. Still does a really good job. The lockup is a little bit later. You can see, I don't know, I would call that maybe 60-ish%, approaching 75. Very solid, like I said. No up and down, no side to side, nice and smooth. The lock bar tension is pretty stiff on this one, but honestly, it's fine. Not sure what this is about here, but all the screws are a different size. Every single one of them. This is a real Strider, as far as I know. It has all the hallmarks and all the feel of a real Strider. I've owned quite a few, but it is just a little bit different. This one, blade thickness here, get that out of the way. We're looking at 183, call it almost 184. There we go, 184. Still a little bit thicker, but very nice. Takes a really, really nice edge as well. Strider's S30V is some of the best in the business. I know that's not like the super steel of the day, but they're very, very nice knives. A little bit of changes. You can see the pivot. The screw inside it has a bigger hole. The pivot itself is maybe a little bit bigger, but it also might be, yeah, these are about the same size. I think this one's just smaller because it's a gunner grip model, or maybe it just looks that way because it's a little bit more chamfered. You can also see right here the stamping is different. This one is actually, I don't know if it was hand stamped, but you can see that it's a little bit stronger and deeper of a stamp on the top of the Strider, where this one is very uniform. And on the back, you have really, really clean lines on the S30V, on the Strider logo, whereas this one is not quite so deep and has a little bit of a different font to it. As far as the NSN, the logo is a little bit different, maybe a little bit more clean, but not quite as clean as the other ones. And you have a really light stamping, really thin Strider on the other side. This was also before. Now they are M Striders after the closing of Strider Knives Incorporated and Mick and Dwayne going their separate ways. So really that's it. Just a quick overview of a few different models. These are pretty much all the Striders I have these days. I have one more. That's an aluminum hybrid gunner grip with the Battleship Gray aluminum scale, and it's actually a flamed lock side like this. That's on loan to a buddy who needs a good knife. He was carrying something not very good, and I let him borrow that. But just a little bit of a comparison. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.